Craving fresh, made-from-scratch Mexican food that actually tastes homemade? Cafe Rio's got you covered. Every tortilla is hand-rolled, every sauce is slow-simmered, and every bite is bursting with bold flavor. Hungry yet? Don't wait. Order now at CafeRio.com. Build your burrito, salad, or tacos exactly how you like them, and we'll have it ready hot, fresh, and fast. Whether it's lunch on the go, dinner with friends, or a full-on fiesta at home, Cafe Rio always brings the flavor and the fun. So what are you waiting for? We've got you covered. Savor the flavor and order now at CafeRio.com.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong, and as always, I'm happy to be back with you for another day. Man, it's been a busy week, and I apologize because I wanted to get this podcast out Monday, and that just wasn't happening with a lot of the news that was happening around with Kalani Sitake, with conversations happening about Utah and kind of all the things that are going on there. And it's just been kind of a whirlwind of stuff the last couple days, and so we're wrapping up the early signing day today, and I'm gonna squeeze in this podcast in the middle of that. So yeah, hopefully I can give you some information on everything, and it won't be outdated by the time you listen to this. Things are changing fast this week, and obviously it's been crazy. But that's the time of the year. The season is not officially over yet. Obviously, Utah will still have a bowl game, but this is where things start kind of progressing to the next year and the off season and everything that way. So there's been a lot of movement that way. So we're gonna talk about all that and get into it. So today we'll do a little conversation on the signing day. What took place and all that. Look at Kyle Whittingham's timeline and what the future holds for Utah football. A look back at Utah's 10-win season and what it means for this season as well as moving forward. And then we'll look at some bowl destinations for the Utes. We'll find that out Sunday. But there's some breadcrumbs and some conversations that I've had that have kind of lined us up to where we're at. So we are going, we're going to get this going and talk about all the changes. So here we go. So let me first tell you about our partners at Cafe Rio. Craving fresh, made-from-scratch Mexican food that actually tastes homemade? Cafe Rio's got you covered. Every tortilla is hand-rolled and every sauce is slow-simmered. And every bite is bursting with bold flavor. Hungry yet? Don't wait. Order now at CafeRio.com. Build your burrito, salad, or tacos exactly how you like them. And we'll have it hot, ready, fresh, and fast. We've got you covered. Savor the flavor and order now at CafeRio.com. All right, let's start with signing day. As of this recording, Utah has 14 players that have committed, have signed, with an additional 2 more that have committed and that will sign, and then an additional 2 more that probably are going to be flipped here in a second. So, so Utah is still, in a smaller class, I would say. That was kind of the intent the entire time with so many freshman players coming in this last year and being an impact player. Utah really didn't need to go that far with a lot of their recruiting, as well as, there's going to be heavy movement in the transfer portal and different things that way. And so it's still kind of keeping a balance there in between all of this and kind of putting it all together. So as of right now, like I said, 14. The class came in pretty quick this year. In some years, you're waiting till, 3, 4, next day, whatever it may be. Most of these came in pretty early, and there haven't been too many changes. So so far so good for Utah and what they do. The biggest news there is they sign officially Kelvin Obot. So this becomes the first 5-star recruit that's ever signed with Utah. This was obviously trending that way for a long time. He committed on July 1st. And really just kind of locked it down from there. There wasn't, looking for other destinations. He wasn't trying to keep his recruitment open necessarily and trying to keep a wandering eye, so to speak. This has always been Utah since he committed, and they get their guy. And so, he's rated the number 3 overall player in Rivals on 3. So pretty big news there. If you look at the 24/7 Sports composite rating, I think he's 27th in the country, 34, somewhere around there. And so, you get one of the best players in the country. And to do that at the offensive tackle position, a position that you're going to lose Spencer Fano to the NFL, and there's still some decisions on Caleb Lomu and if he wants to come back or leave. He did walk, as you may remember, but there's still some decisions that he has to make. This is a big boon for Utah. And so you get a lot of that back, and, there's a lot of optimism that he can kind of be a day one starter and really take the reins from Spencer Fano. And so, good opportunity there, for it to be a 5-star offensive tackle, that it's perfect sense for Utah. Utah wants to win in the trenches. They want to be physical. They want to just dominate. And I think you're going to see a little bit more of that as this continues. So, there's some interest there in being able to kind of keep this moving and keeping those offensive linemen moving through Utah with Jim Harding and kind of the success that he has had. And so Utah does sign, as of right now, 4 additional linemen. And so there's, big emphasis there, obviously, with Utah going through kind of the transition year where you're losing essentially everybody on that offensive line, at least the starters. There are some good depth pieces that can be your starting caliber players next year. But for the most part, you're losing, that whole unit. And so it's going to be really interesting to kind of see how that comes together and see what Utah's able to do. But, that's the nature of the game, and you ride that hot hand and trust that Jim Harding can get his guys up to be at that level. So you get a lot of the linemen there. That's going to be a big boon for Utah. You get LaMarcus Bell, a running back from Oregon. He's the number 2 rated player in the state of Oregon. Pushed off some late pushes from Oregon, and really just locked in his commitment to Utah. He shares the same agent as Bird Fickland, and so there's obviously a good connection there, and being able to have kind of that understanding of what Utah is. And so that's a great opportunity for Utah. And so, you get a lot of potential there. And so beyond that, there's a lot of different players that aren't too unfamiliar to Utah fans are in the mix of recruiting. And so there's not too many changes. Utah did flip a commitment today from Michigan State. It's a defensive tackle who is not officially signed yet, but he has committed to Utah, so we're waiting for that one. So that doesn't factor in the 14 yet, but that should be coming soon. And then Utah's still waiting for another QB. They did sign Kane Archer from Arkansas, not the university, but from the state of Arkansas, a 3-star QB. So you've got 2 QBs in, but you've got one signed, another waiting. And we'll get there. There's also, a lot of talk this offseason, this whole season, excuse me. I don't know. We're already trying to hit off-season mode, I guess, apparently in my brain. A lot of talk coming down the stretch about the Pulu twins and kind of where their commitment is and everything. My understanding, and from people that I've talked to, is this will be a commitment that flips, likely to BYU. There's still Utah trying to push to keep them, but the longer this goes on, the more it feels like it's a BYU thing. And so, there's been a lot of up and down with this one. Look, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of it. At the end of the day, these guys, they grew up close to BYU. There was potential that they were going to go there. There was kind of a falling out, so to speak, between kind of parties. And so they committed to UCLA, and then obviously backed off from that earlier this year and committed to Utah. And by all accounts, we're seemingly happy with Utah, but there was always kind of this lingering thought that they were going to go to BYU, and that appears that that's going to be the case, but still not official. We'll see there. And then there's a couple other commits that, Celesi Moa, obviously a top guy in the state of Utah. He's being talked about as potentially flipping to Utah. Rivals is talking about him delaying his commitment or his signing. And there's been a big push from Utah, at least according to a lot of the reporters, and I've heard it here as well, that they're still trying to get him. They've been trying to get Celesi this whole time, right? Like, so there's never been this dropping of him. They've been pushing hard to keep him. Obviously, as a legacy recruit with his dad having played here. So there's been a lot of constant communication. Moa was at Utah's last home game. He was there to watch and to be an invited guest there. So there's always been communication and conversations between these two, and trying to get Celesi to come here is obviously a big opportunity for Utah and what he could provide to the Utes on the offensive side of the ball as well as on the defense, right? Like Utah has shown that they can do two-way players, and I think you'll get a lot of potential there. So we'll see what happens there. If he decides to sign in the early period, he's got till Friday. And so this isn't something that's going to probably be quick. I would assume that you don't hear anything today, or at least I haven't heard anything as it relates to him signing today. But that could all change by the time you listen to this podcast. So Utah's still in the mix there. Whether they get Moa or not, remains TBD. But obviously would be a big opportunity for Utah. He would fall right under Kelvin Obot in the recruiting rankings of where Utah's at. So he would be number 2 in that recruiting rankings in terms of who Utah brings in. So big opportunity for Utah should that take place. And then there's another one that I'm going to keep off for right now that Utah is trying to flip. There's been some changes obviously in the coaching staffs around the country, and so this is an opportunity where Utah can try to get somebody that way. So, obviously if you can get those commitments and you do that, that's going to be a big boon for Utah and help this recruiting class. That gets you up to roughly 18. If the Pulu twins decide to stay and you get all of those, you get up to 20. A decent sized class, and I think that helps, especially on the side where Utah needs the help to get more wide receivers, right? And so I think that's going to be a big opportunity for Utah should that happen. So that's kind of where it is right now. We're going to see what happens. There's a lot of movement in all this as well. Utah's not the only one. Every school is in the middle of this. BYU is currently in the middle of that with Ryder Lyons, who has kind of announced that he's not going to commit or sign on Wednesday. So we'll see what happens all there. Schools are going to do their best to try to pull different players away, and so this is evolving, and it's always going to be something that changes. So maybe by the next podcast, well, I would hope by the next podcast that we have, that all of that will be sorted out. Utah will have an idea of where they're at in a bowl game. We'll have an idea more of kind of the transfer portal stuff. But as of right now, everything's pretty ho-hum, not a lot of movement. Everybody that Utah got, they have got so far, and it's now just a matter of kind of seeing the rest of those pieces fall. So we'll kind of get there. Now, beyond that, let's jump into the Kyle Whittingham sweepstakes. And it's not a sweepstakes in the sense that he's entertaining other offers from other schools like Kalani Sitake did with Penn State earlier this week, which was crazy. And quite honestly, his decision to stay at stay at BYU, excuse me, I got ahead of myself. His decision to stay at BYU does help Utah because, there's obviously coaching staff connections there, and there's going to be potential that those guys would move on to Penn State if that was the case. Over the last 48 hours or so, I was hearing a whole bunch of stuff, and so it was getting pretty crazy. I honestly thought Kalani Sitake was leaving. Every indication and the people that I talked to said that it was basically a done deal. Obviously, there was conversations on Twitter of Penn State believing that they had a handshake agreement with nothing pen on the paper type thing, but everything was progressing that way, and then suddenly BYU pulled out this, they want to call it a miracle, but you can call it whatever you want, of rallying the troops. Crumble Cookies got involved, and there's a lot of drama related to that. But Sitake is staying at BYU, and as such, that kind of keeps things down a little bit and helps Utah to some extent. And so, it's as much as these two programs hate each other and don't want to be connected to each other, they're the most interconnected programs out there. And so whatever happens with one may impact the other, and in this case, it would have impacted Utah. And so really fascinating to kind of see how that all goes. Now, how that relates to all this is getting back to Kyle Whittingham. A lot of his decision, too, it was trying to figure out what was going to happen there, right? And trying to see what would be the kind of ripple effects of that. So what Kyle Whittingham has to do is he has to announce to the university by December 5th, so on Friday, of his intentions to either stay or retire. Now, he doesn't officially have to do that, but if he doesn't do that, he reverts back to a contract that is just not as advantageous to him. It was money spread out over a longer period of time, and it was smaller. So doing so, giving the decision by December 5th is much more advantageous to him because he gets much more upfront money. It's bigger. There's just a lot of different things, clauses in his contract that's more beneficial for him to decide now. Now, the situation with Kyle, all along this season, it's been trending that way that this is going to be his last season. That was similar last year, but this one feels a little bit more different, especially in the conversations that I've had with people. Everything just feels like this is kind of where it's at. We obviously get the conversations with Kyle in the press conference after senior day where he gets choked up. We talked about that. It felt more than just being about the seniors, though that absolutely is a genuine personality with him of his seniors. And I know some people say, well, he doesn't get choked up with seniors at all. That's partially true. I mean, the thing is, Kyle loves every single one of these guys, and this is part of his family, right? And so losing part of that family, so to speak, and having them move on is tough for him. So mixing all that together, knowing that it potentially could be his last game at Rice-Eccles Stadium, I think all those emotions just kind of came to a boiling point and kind of ran over, and you see those emotions. But then at the Kansas game, so on the road, we're in Kansas City, or Lawrence, Kansas, actually. There was just more in relation to that. A majority of it, well, not a majority, but a lot of his family was there, present. His children were there. He's acting, or his family is going through the motions, I would say, of looking like he was done. That this was kind of the end. I won't get into all the specifics because it's not. As much as I'm a journalist and I want to get into all those details, I think there's just some things that are personal for the families, and I don't feel like that's worth sharing. But let's just say that there's stuff that the family was kind of organizing themselves in a way that it feels like this is the end, right? And so that mixed with the conversations that I've had with people just kind of leads me down the path that this is it. But on that same vein, all along, there's also been conversations that I've had with people that are really close to him where this is a struggle for him. He doesn't know what retirement life is going to look like, right? And this is a conversation that I actually had with him about a month ago when I was writing a story about he and his son in the coaching world. He admitted to me that he's nervous about what retirement looks like and what his future looks like, right? Like he gets that has to happen someday, and that he has to eventually turn in the whistle and go live a normal life. But it's a real struggle for him because this is something that he's known his entire life. He's done this, since he was a kid with his dad. He's doing it himself. He's now got his son in the coaching world. This is just his entire life. And when he talks about family, this isn't just, a phrase that you put on the board and you say, we're a Utah family. That's how Kyle Whittingham treats it. He goes into this believing that every single person there is his family, and that hasn't changed in the transfer portal era. That hasn't changed in the NIL era. There's obviously much more transactional relationships with some of these players, but for the most part, Kyle is deeply connected with all of these players. And so being able to tell himself that he can step away from that is a real struggle because he wants to be able to be connected with them. And so as much as I believe that there is still retirement on the plan and that will be the end goal or end case, there's still truly potential that Kyle Whittingham returns. And so I don't want to rule that out. I'm not just throwing that out there as kind of a casual, like it could happen. Like depending on who I talk to at certain times of the day, like it genuinely feels like that could be the case. And so don't be surprised by anything. I know there's many in the fan base that want to see him move on, not just for himself, but just for kind of the future of the program and moving toward Morgan Scalley and kind of a younger generation. But at the same time, you've got a head coach that has found a way to be able to transition to the times. Is it perfect? No, right? Like there's obviously things that are different and that he's going to hold on to that maybe a younger generation isn't going to hold on to. But at the same time, he got your team to a 10-win season again. And so, be careful what you wish for. That's what I'll say, right? Like, I think it's easy to say, okay, we want to move on to Morgan Scalley. And I don't have any doubts that Scalley will be a great head coach. I've known Scally for many years, and I believe that he's been lined up in a way that this makes perfect sense. But at the same time, it's tough to be able to move on from somebody that has had so much success, right? It's not easy to be able to say, yeah, we want this. As you're finding out with Penn State fired a head coach that was very successful, and now they can't even hire a coach, and they're getting spurned by a lot of different programs, and it's not always, the grass isn't always greener, right? Now, in this case, it's a little different because Kyle Whittingham will retire someday, maybe in 10 years, but he will retire someday. And I still do think that it is this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if he decides to come back. And if so, that may have changes, right? Like that may have changes in the direction Morgan Scally goes. He's obviously a hot commodity in the coaching market all the time. He's turned down lucrative offers to be head coaches, to be defensive coordinators at quote unquote bigger programs. He's got his options. And, if this is something where he's okay riding out with Kyle Whittingham again, that's a great opportunity for Utah should Kyle come back. But don't be surprised if Morgan also puts his name out there as a potential candidate to go somewhere else. And I think, it's easy to be able to be frustrated by that. But at the same time, Morgan's got to do what's best for him. With that said, Morgan is deeply committed to the University of Utah, more so than probably many out there. But there's also an opportunity where, he needs to kind of move and he needs to kind of get that with him. And if he does leave, that will have ramifications on the program, and coaches will follow him because he is charismatic. Players will follow him. Like, this is the direction. And that's not a threat, right? Like, that's not a threat to Kyle Whittingham. Well, it can be a threat in the sense that if he does decide to come, that can be a realistic possibility. But it's not one of those things that Morgan is going to hold over him and say, if you don't retire, this is what's going to happen. It's more just the nature of kind of what that is. At the end of the day, I still think Morgan Scally stays at Utah. Like I said, he's a Utah man. This is where he wants to live. His family is deeply entrenched in this state. He has no desires to leave. But if the opportunity is right, I mean, heck, Penn State keeps losing a bunch of coaches. Maybe they look to him. I would be surprised. But, you never know. And if you can go get a payday and go be a coach and then Utah opens up someday and that's where you want to go, then that's great. If not, you're in a good situation somewhere else potentially, and you've got a great opportunity there. So, a lot of fluidity with this. Kyle is obviously going to have to decide, and this was never at least I'd never thought it was going to be decided, at least officially before signing day. You want to get that through, and then Kyle will announce, or, potentially. We don't really know. He has to let the university know, but there's no guarantee that will get out to the public. I will say, though, that once that's turned in, things get leaky, right? And that's going to be learned, and then you risk the chance of breaking it yourself as opposed to somebody else doing that, whether it be a national reporter or one of us local reporters or somebody else. Heck, even a player could do it. So that's kind of where it's at, where I think you're going to see something potentially this week, if not early next week. I know Kyle would love to just ride out into the sunset and not even have anybody pay attention to him. But I think this comes to the point where you're going to have to see something. So one way or the other, you're going to hear something about Kyle Whittingham. As it relates to recruiting, these recruits are being recruited knowing that there's going to be a potential change. They all understand that they're not coming for Kyle Whittingham. They're most likely coming for Morgan Scally. That's not to say that these recruits would be upset if Kyle would be there, but it does change some things, right? Morgan, he has a different personality, and as much as he wants to run it in a similar way as Kyle, Morgan is going to run it his own way, and he's going to do things a little bit differently. He does it in a way that still demands a lot of the respect and the attention and the family, and attention to detail, but it's different, right? And so we'll see what that is. Until that actually takes place, we won't know. So there's not going to be any surprises to any of these kids that have recruited or been recruited and signed today. It's all pretty well in the mix that this is there. Kyle isn't shy of talking about it, right? Like, this is not something that is a surprise. So don't be surprised if you see Kyle Whittingham come back. I think it is leaning somewhat more that way, but I still lean, maybe we'll go 55-45 right now of Kyle walking away. I think if he can just finally get over the fact that he can retire and that he can have a life outside of football, whether that be, going to his son's football games, hanging out with his grandchildren, still being connected with the university through his contract that makes him a special assistant and deeply connected into the program. There's always going to be a connection. It's just a matter of turning in your own whistle and letting others do it and just being kind of an observer instead of the main participant. That's the biggest question. So, I think it's going to be interesting. We'll see what happens. We should get that in the coming days, and hopefully we'll have a better idea of what Utah football looks like after that. If it does transition fully to Morgan Scalley, I'd have to imagine there is many of the staff members that will stay, but there will be changes. And, that's just the nature of him trying to create his own staff. Who becomes defensive coordinator? Is it Sharif Shah? Is it, Colton Swan? Is it somebody else? I know a lot of people want Jay Hill. I don't think Jay Hill's coming back to Utah as much as you want to wish that. Sure, there's always potential, and he and Scalley obviously have a great connection or have had a great connection, but at the same time, that's not a guarantee, and BYU is going to do whatever they can to keep him because they love him dearly, and clearly he and Kalani have got something special there that they work together. So, we'll see what happens. I think that'll all be interesting, and maybe next time or this time next week we'll be talking about that transition. But most likely it's going to be business as usual. There's not going to be a lot of conversations about what this is going to be. There's going to be a lot of focus on the bowl game. Potentially Utah should have a lot of its players still in that, and so it's not as much of an exhibition as it traditionally is, but that's still TBD. There's a lot to learn before that, and we'll get into those destinations here shortly. Now, before we do that, let me tell you about our other partners, Canyon View Credit Union. At Canyon View Credit Union, it's on the house. Close a mortgage and get a free appraisal up to $600. To learn more details or apply, visit canyonviewcu.com. All right, let's take a little look back at the last game of the season. I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty there, right? Like I don't need to recap every little moment of it. Utah obviously didn't look as clean for most of that game as well, and then finds another level in the fourth quarter again in back-to-back weeks. The defensive effort was a little bit better. It was a lot better in the sense that you got 3 interceptions, but it still wasn't perfect in terms of how they did against the run and tackling and all that. Those are problems that have been the case for the entirety of the season, but not nearly to the level that they were this last little bit. So you get that. It gets you to, a 10-win season. There were some pretty heroic things going on there. Devin Dampier just absolutely sending it to Larry Simmons on a fake draw and, sealing the win, and Utah comes away with a 10-point win over Kansas to finish 10-2. And it's that situation there where I don't think people really recognize how rare a 10-win season is. And so looking at this for Utah, it's the first time in the regular season since 2019. There's been 10-win seasons, but they've been more as a championship or a bowl game. Well, bowl game wins haven't come a lot recently, but it's been mostly championships or something that way. And so 2019 was the first time or the last time that Utah has had a regular season 10-win season. And it's only the second in the Power 4 era for Utah. That's how rare it is. So, and I'm talking regular season. It's only the 4th in the regular season all time in Kyle Whittingham's era. And in Whittingham's tenure, so in 21 years, he's gotten 8 10-win seasons. That's what shows. That's what this season's about. Like as many how I want to say this. Fans obviously wanted more, right? And there's a good reason for wanting more because Utah was close to BYU. They should have, potentially gotten that win against BYU. I think that's how many feel. There were potentials there against Texas Tech, and obviously things didn't go well for Utah and Texas Tech. So you can't fully count that game in there, but it's a 3-point game at one point, and it's not easy. And so, you still feel like there was more there. But at the same time, don't gloss over a 10-win season because it just doesn't happen that often. Utah's one of only 15 teams this year in the Power 4 that finished with a 10-win season. So of all the, 64 teams, 15, right? And sometimes that's more or less than other years, but That's a pretty remarkable season. The SEC had 6, Big Ten 3, Big 12 3, ACC 2, and in Notre Dame they had 1. So it's not an easy thing. And so as much as you can be frustrated with how the season ended in terms of not being able to look the way that you wanted, you still have to remember that Utah found another gear. They got to 10 wins, especially coming off the last year where it was a 5-7 season. This is a great turnaround. I think if you went into the preseason and told people that Utah would finish 10-2, they'd be pretty excited. I think you'd expect that Utah would be in the Big 12 championship game, but at the same time, you're never going to be upset about a 10-win season. And so I think there's a lot of pieces there that can still move forward for next year, assuming that Utah can keep a lot of these guys, which I've heard good things about a lot of the key players. You're going to lose players, but a lot of the key players that are going to be beneficial for Utah. So far, things are trending well, and that bodes well for Utah moving forward. But this is more of the bounce back that Utah needed to show to kind of really resonate with people to say, hey, look, the last 2 years were aberrations, right? If you don't have a fully injured team, this is what it can be. And, Utah showed that they can be a dominant force in the Big 12. Next year's schedule is even easier than this year, at least on paper, right? We still don't know. There's going to be transfer portals. There's going to be different things that way. But on paper, Utah doesn't have to play Texas Tech next year. I don't believe they have to play Arizona State next year. There's going to be other teams that come up. Arizona is a team that's coming up right now and doing really well. On paper, this absolutely can be another strong season. But you needed the year like this to kind of prove that Utah was back, that Utah can compete in the Big 12, that Utah can be in the mix of these conference title games, and they can be in the mix of the playoffs. And yeah, the Utes aren't going to the playoffs, right? The College Football Playoff Committee, they released their penultimate rankings yesterday and dropped Utah 2 spots to 15. It's a tough look, and obviously this committee is flawed in how they manage things, and there's other debates. BYU obviously feels like they have been left out, and they probably have a good case, right? And you can disagree that BYU doesn't have XYZ, but the reality is they're an 11-1 team. They've got a good resume. They've done exactly what they needed to. Those things matter, right? And they're not in there. You've got Miami, you've got Notre Dame, you've got all these teams that are kind of in that mix that are frustrated that they're not in there. Vanderbilt. There's a lot of teams out there, and Utah's in that mix. And so, it's not an easy situation, but at the end of the day, you're in the mix for that. You've got an opportunity to be in Big 12 championship games. You've got the playoffs on the disposal. Like, that's where you need to be. And if you can be Utah, you can and be in that mix, you're going to be in a good situation. Things are going to trend upward. You're not going to have the down season like last year where it felt like the sky was falling and that Utah was never going to get back to where it needed to be. Had Utah been passed by with time, had Kyle Whittingham been passed by, this year kind of proves that that's not the case. And so I think if you can continue to build on this and stack this and continue to move forward, Utah absolutely can be one of the top teams in the conference. You're getting competition from BYU, which only makes that rivalry more heated and more entertaining. And I think it's good that you have 2 Power 4 teams in the state that are at a top level. BYU spending a ton of money in NIL and putting a lot of emphasis is a good thing for Utah. And I say that because you can either adapt or die. And so this is where you get to learn from Utah what they're all about. Is Utah about moving forward and absolutely trying to compete, or are they going to be able to sit by and just let their rival do it for them? And I get this growing sentiment from the fan base and from donors and others that they're not satisfied with that. Now, you're competing with a lot of money, but at the same time, it's a galvanizing moment that allows you to be able to move forward. And now that you have a 10-win season to show and give the proof that you can do that, that kind of gives that weight that allows you to be able to move forward and say, hey, we've got to go compete with these guys or we're going to get lost. And both of those 2 programs are going to be doing that with Texas Tech, who has seemingly unlimited money and is able to do whatever they want. Now, there's certain regulations and rules that have to be checked here, but at the same time, the NCAA is still kind of a Wild West. And so until somebody actually gets flagged or things change, most of these teams are going to continue to invest a ton of money into these programs and trying to force this to be a bigger and better operation. And so this is a good opportunity for Utah to now have that weight behind them to say, hey, we are a 10-win team. We are a team that can compete in the Big 12. Now, if you give us more resources, look at what we can do. You see that with BYU. You see that with Texas Tech. Now, if you can compete with that, that's going to be better. And it's obviously an arms race, right? Like there's things where it's going to burst and it's not going to work effectively. And so Utah has to be careful with that. But I think it can serve as a great opportunity for Utah to kind of recognize where they're at, where they want to be. Obviously, there's a desire to be in the, whatever the final destination is of the Power 2 or Super Leagues or whatever it may be. That's Utah's destination. That's where they want, right? The question now is, can they parlay this stuff, the 10-win seasons, the being in the mix for a Big 12 title game, being in the mix for the college football playoffs, and having those conversations around you? Can you parlay that to the next level? Or are you going to be still just a step behind and not be able to be there? And if you allow your rival to do that and they get it and you don't, that absolutely changes everything for you. And then then the sky is falling and then everything's in a world of hurt. So I know the University of Utah's president, Taylor Randall, has this vision. He wants to move forward. He wants to be able to get Utah into these higher destinations, but it's going to take a lot of effort. And, I'd like to say it's all money, and a lot of it is, but there's going to have to be different things like this 10-win season, stacking those, keeping recruits, keeping top-tier talent in the state, keeping it in your program and not letting others, quote-unquote, big-time programs poach you. That's going to be of vital importance. And so we'll see how that goes. It's never going to be perfect, right? Like there's going to be players that move on. There's going to be different things that distract or take away, or donors aren't going to come for certain reasons, but it's always trying to keep at the forefront of that. And Utah's kind of in that mix, right? Where they want to be at the top and they want to compete. They're not quite there yet. They're still more middling there, but they need something to break through. And I think a season like this is where you start to get that. You can continue to move forward and you continue to grow on that. So we'll see. Like I said, there's still so many changes here to kind of figure out, whether it's Kyle Whittingham staying, whether it's Morgan Scalley moving forward. There's still going to be some hesitations with Morgan his first year on can he do it? And there should be, right? Until you're proven as a head coach, there's always going to be questions. And he recognizes that and he wants that. He's a prideful person that wants to be able to have his test out there and be able to move forward and see what it is. It's a tough battle to follow a legend, but at the same time he feels very confident in what he can do. And if he can galvanize the fan base and galvanize donors and get all that and continue to move Utah forward, that's where you need him to be. And so we'll see what happens and kind of move forward with that and get there. A lot of this stuff is still very speculative, right? It's still trying to figure out what's going to move forward for Utah. But at the end, if you think of anything with this season, and regardless of what happens in the bowl game, excuse me, I just dropped something. Regardless of what happens in the bowl game, and you clearly want to have a win, you have to look at this season as a success. And I believe most do, right? I don't think anybody's looking at this as not being a success. But I think based on those last two games, it really kind of changed some of the outlook of where Utah fans were feeling. But at the same time, when you take a step back, it's been almost a week since their last game. You get an opportunity now to kind of say, hey, this is where we're at. And so, don't take these things for granted because 10-win seasons don't come that often. I know that's kind of the goal every program has is to have 10-win seasons or double-digit win seasons, but it's just not that easy. And it only gets harder now in this era of the transfer portal where programs can re-envision themselves overnight, and you've got much more talent coming out than ever. And yeah, there is some consolidation of powers with some programs, but for the most part, it's equalizing it out. And to be able to stay on the top, it takes a constant push to be able to get there and move forward. So I don't want to belabor the point. I don't want to continue that. Obviously, 10-win season is important. And so, that's where it is. So let's close today with just bowl destinations and kind of where things are at. There's been a lot of confusion over how this goes. So when Utah left the Pac-12, the Pac-12 had signed a bowl agreement that extended past their grant of rights or their TV market numbers and all that stuff. And so essentially the contract is now for 2 years after the conference dissolved, so to speak. And so what that means is this is the last year where all of the the Pac-12 teams that were previously in the conference, all of them are still in line for the Pac-12 bowls. And so unless you're in a college football playoff bowl game or one of those playoff spots, you're now slotted into the Pac-12. And so Utah is in the mix with USC, Washington. Oregon's going to be a playoff team most likely. I can't see a world where they drop out, but that would alter a lot of this if that were the case that they dropped out. But this is kind of how it would go, right? So you're not competing against Big 12 teams in terms of the playoff or the bowl games. You're competing against your former Pac-12 opponents. So you've got that in the mix. So how this shakes out, the pecking order for the Pac-12. Obviously, the playoffs are what they are, and so you get that. And then beyond that, the Alamo Bowl, as you may remember, is kind of the top bowl game that the conference can choose from. It then goes Las Vegas, and then it goes Holiday Bowl. And those are going to be the bowl games where Utah's in the mix for. If you know or may remember, bowl committees, so the people that select the teams for these bowls, they can choose a team within one win or loss of the team next to it. So, Utah is at 10-2. For example, USC is at 9-3, so that fits in that realm where even though USC is below Utah record-wise, they can jump Utah in the bowl things or the bowl designations if the committee wants them. And this is a situation where the committee is likely going to pick USC for the Alamo Bowl simply because USC has never played there before. It's a top-tier destination for them. They want to have the Trojans come there. If BYU doesn't get into the playoff, which seems likely given that they have to win the championship, and if obviously they win the championship, that changes things. But if they don't win the championship, there's a good possibility that BYU will play USC in the Alamo Bowl. So, would be interesting. Utah, as I said, has a better overall record, but there's potential that they could be jumped. Utah still can be in the mix for the Alamo Bowl, but based on the conversations that I've had with people, that doesn't appear to be the case. It does feel like this is a USC game for them to have, and so, we'll see. And I think there's many Utah fans that are okay with that. Not that San Antonio is a bad place, but I think it's just not as easy as Las Vegas or the Holiday Bowl for Utah fans to come to, and so there's that. So the biggest destination right here is Las Vegas, given that if USC does get that spot, Las Vegas would most likely go with Utah. There's no real reason not to. They would have the biggest draw, obviously, in terms of fan base. You also get a team that's ranked 15th in the country, assuming that that's where Utah stays in the final rankings on Sunday. But you get a ranked team coming in there paired up with a Big Ten team that has potential to be a good game. And as in years past where this was right before Christmas, you may remember the terrible game on December 23rd, the day before Christmas Eve, where Utah limped into the Las Vegas Bowl and had to play Northwestern and ended up losing that game. Like, this is a different situation for Utah, and I think there's a lot better opportunities for Utah, and the game itself can be better, so we'll see. So that's Utah's side of it. Who would they be paired up with, though? That's the biggest question, right? And so the Big Ten has the Vegas Bowl as their third lowest bowl game in their pecking order. And so it goes, obviously, the college football playoffs, and then there's the Citrus Bowl, the ReliaQuest Bowl, and then the Las Vegas Bowl. So assuming from the Big Ten that Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon are all playoff teams, those teams are going to be out of that mix. USC is going to the Alamo Bowl, but they're a Pac-12 team, so that doesn't factor into that. So the next highest one would be Michigan. Michigan would fall to the Citrus Bowl, which seems like their destination. There's potential that it could be Michigan and Alabama, Michigan and Texas. Probably not Alabama, but Michigan and Texas. Who's not going to want that game in the Citrus Bowl? You're going to take that. ReliaQuest Bowl, this is where things get a little tricky. But it looks like it's probably Iowa going to that. With Iowa being ranked in the College Football Playoff Committee rankings, ReliaQuest is going to take them. You're going to want them, and so it's going to be kind of the situation there. But there is potential that Illinois could be there. I just don't see it. I don't see Illinois being the game there. So Las Vegas, essentially, if it falls to the projected order in terms of standings, it would be Utah versus Illinois. I don't think that's how it's going to be. I've heard a lot more conversations about Utah and Nebraska. That seems to fit more. Nebraska does not have Dylan Raiola anymore at quarterback, and so there is a difference there. But they do have a great rusher, which would be detrimental to Utah. However, we'll see if he decides to play. If that were to be the case, we'll break all that stuff down. But Nebraska would be probably the most entertaining game. Obviously, an old blue blood that would be coming up against Utah would be a great opportunity to be able to play against a traditional Big Ten team now. This would be a great opportunity. There is a small chance Iowa's there. I doubt it. There's also potential for Minnesota to be there involved with Illinois as well. So really curious to see what happens there. There is potential to drop to the Holiday Bowl, but I doubt it. Washington is probably pegged to be in the Holiday Bowl. I don't think it's a lose-lose if you get to the Holiday Bowl, but I think Vegas feels like the most likely. And so what that would be, it would be a New Year's Eve game that would be played in the afternoon of New Year's Eve, so you can go watch the bowl game at Allegiant Stadium and then do whatever you do on New Year's Eve in Vegas. And I'm sure, there's going to be a lot of things where whatever happens there stays there type. But, that's for you to decide. So this feels like a good opportunity for Utah. In terms of meaningless exhibition bowl type games, this feels like one that can at least have some juice. The date fits. Utah fans are going to be excited to go there. It's after Christmas. You're not trying to go up against that. You've got an opportunity where you get to be in this large party city on one of the biggest party nights of the year. It all kind of fits. And so we'll see what happens. It's not a guarantee by any means, but it's feeling much more like a guarantee at this point. So if you're gutsy, go get your tickets. If you're flying, if you're driving's probably the easiest way to do this last minute. But that's probably where it's going to be, and I think that's probably a great destination for Utah given everything. So one more trip in Vegas. I know people love to consider that as Rice-Eccles Stadium South, another one. So we'll see. I think it's a good opportunity, but I think overall this is a good opportunity for Utah to kind of end the season, and we'll see what happens. It could be Kyle Whittingham's last bowl game. It could be just the stepping stone to another another year, excuse me. We'll see. Or he just decides to walk away and let Morgan Scalley coach that. I don't think that ever happens, but crazier things have happened, and we'll see. So this is going to be an entertaining last few days of this week. Moving into next week, on Sunday you will get the official designations. So the college football playoffs will be released, and then we'll see where Utah lands. So it's gonna be an entertaining weekend. Utah obviously is sitting on the sidelines watching championship game weekend. Use that as motivation, I guess, to get there next year. But you've got a lot going for you, and assuming that you can continue to get these recruits that you want, and continuing to get the transfer portal and lock up a lot of the players that are impactful players, a la Devin Dampier, Bird Ficklin, if you can keep both of those together, which it's trending towards both of them staying potentially, that bodes really well for Utah. And there's a lot of pieces that you can build off, especially if those two stay. So really fascinated to see how this goes, and I'll keep you posted on all of that as we go. We're shifting a little bit more to the off season in terms of football. We'll start getting in some basketball and eventually some gymnastic stuff, but we'll primarily keep this still a football podcast and continue to kind of do things there. I'll try to get some guests on moving forward. As I mentioned a couple times ago, maybe, I am officially merging with the full KSL entity. I don't need to get back into explaining how that all works, but potentially Bartle and I can continue to do things together, whereas before it was a little different relationship. So there's potential there. We'll see. I'm hoping to have a lot of fun and new engaging things to do, especially with this new partnership or merger. And so we'll see what happens. But with that, we're going to sign off today, and hopefully none of this is outdated by the time you listen to this. There's going to be some. You're going to get some new recruits, and there's going to be some new things happening. But, I wish you all the best. Enjoy the conference championship weekends. We'll see what happens on Sunday, and we'll go from there. And then we'll be talking probably Las Vegas Bowl, talking transfer portal, we'll talking all that kind of stuff. So we'll go from there, but I appreciate you listening today, and we will chat with you later.